the article on my end.
So yeah, we are live. So
Yo, what's
thanks,
up?
thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, so
Uh,
today we're going to be looking at a very interesting article on anti-natalism. So, do you want to briefly introduce yourself to people
yeah,
who?
so I go by Aputa online. My name is Arvind, and I've been vegan for like 6-7 years. I count from you could say 7 years. Count from 2017, so it's 2024. So yeah, it's 7 years. Um, and I used to do quite a bit of street activism and online activism, that kind of stuff, until the pandemic. And after the pandemic, well, I shouldn't say after, but once things got relaxed, I ended up getting a PhD position. So I am now pursuing my PhD in structural biology. That's why I don't get as much time, and wherever I am is pretty far from any activism hotspot in the city that I am in right now. So I'm sort of off the grid with respect to offline activism, but online I still do debates. I I have like a podcast that I run. It's called the Vegan Veranda, and this article about antinatalism is one that I wrote for that podcast, the website, the blog website of that podcast. Um, so that's a bit about me.
So yeah, I encourage everyone to check out Aputa's YouTube channel. It's great.
Yeah.
Lots of interesting debates and some also some videos you've done on like a recent one was to do with hypocrisy claims, right?
Hypocrisy arguments, yeah.
Cool. So do you want to briefly introduce people to what your article is about?
Yeah, just give me a second so that I can pull up my article. There it is. Okay, fine.
Okay.
uh, yeah, basically, like I think I even give this sort of backstory in the article itself, but just to make it a bit more personalized. Um, and I'm having some dark black coffee and some dark chocolate over there, which I'll keep munching on periodically, so don't mind. Um, but yeah, so the backstory basically is that when I turned vegan, um, I was in a company of people who happened to be anti-natalists, and as all new vegans are, we are sort of confused in the beginning. It's very rare for a vegan who has turned vegan, but they have like absolute clarity on all of their moral preferences and leanings and all of that. So just like everyone else, I think, profoundly confused about my values. uh, and I mean, one of the main confusions was about like crop deaths and the impact humans have on non-human animals apart from killing and eating them. uh, and discussions around that eventually ended up with people telling me, oh, like if you think these things are like important, then you should consider being an antinatalist. And at the time I was pretty young, so it's a it's a choice that I can make. It's not like I've already had kids or whatever. It's something that I can choose to do in the future. um, so yeah, so people encourage me to be an antinatalist, and for a significant I would say for a significant amount of time, say from 2017-ish to whatever 2019-ish or something like that. I did consider myself an antinatalist. Now, it's important to sort of distinguish between what an antinatalist is and what a child-free person is. Just a second, let me just update on my socials so that people know that we're live. Just a sec.
So what you're talking about right now is sort of what's summarized in this first paragraph of your article.
Right, right. Roughly speaking, that's so. The title is that I'm not an antinatalist anymore, which sort of implies that there was some point of time where I was an antinatalist. I'm just giving like a backstory about that. Um,
So yeah, some
okay.
ideas. Yeah, you're saying that piggyback on veganism to which
Yeah.
you've got that.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of, and I say piggyback is because I don't think I would have heard of antinatalism if not for the vegan circle. I wouldn't have uh, gotten into like intersectionality and like minimalism. Like all of these things are like extremely minimalism. I don't mean the art aesthetic. I mean the I mean, I don't even know, but it's like the practice where people think they want to minimize their impact or something like that. I think that's really vague, but yeah, whatever they mean by it. So that's kind of what I mean. I don't mean the art aesthetic. So minimalism, intersectionality, antinatalism, all of this stuff was probably never going to come to me if I hadn't been involved in the vegan community. Now, it could just be that I was independently exposed if I wasn't vegan, or even if I was vegan, I was not part of a community which exposed me to those things. I might have still at some point come across these ideas, but um, I'm just saying that like there's a sort of like an observation that many vegans are also antinatalists, and there is like a belief that vegan values lead to antinatalism and stuff like that. So some people say that oh, vegan values lead to antinatalism. Some people say antinatalist values lead to veganism. There's a lot of hodgepodge here and there, but that's sort of the backstory. Uh, but what happened is eventually I got into better company. Now I am no longer in the company of people who barely have any exposure to like analytic philosophy and all of that. So now I got into better company. I joined like the Ask Yourself Discord server. Um, I got into like the Study Archive Discord server, and even talked to a few people who aren't active members of that server, but they have a similar analytic approach uh, to looking at these things. And upon interacting with them, and I'll even like name. So there's a guy called Sachin. He's a really good debater. In fact, a lot of my debate chops are attributable to him giving me feedback. Um, and so yeah, like I even did like a small video. It's not even like a debate video or whatever. But like we played an online escape room thing. So if you want links, you can find his links in from that video. Um, but yeah, like basically, like I got into company with like some really smart people, and some of the confusion I had with respect to these things, especially stuff like crop deaths, um, and like suffering, and just being more aware of what kind of normative theory best captures my values. We'll talk about normative theories, but yeah, getting more clarity about my moral views in general, I just figured out that antinatalism doesn't follow from it. And that's kind of what I start. So let's start by first distinguishing and defining like what antinatalism is and what's child free and all of that. So now we're getting into like the second paragraph, I guess, the second section, which is defining and distinguishing. Um, so there are two terms which I like to separate. There are people who don't like to separate. This is completely proprietary. I'm not making any claim that this is how it is standardly used by antinatalist or something like that. I'm not saying that. This is how I understand these concepts, and this is how I sort of bifurcate them. So I take child free to be someone who does not want kids, maybe because they think that having kids collides with some of their other desires and goals. Say, for example, if someone wants to excel at something in their career, maybe they want to excel at their career uh, beyond some limit, and in order to achieve that, they believe that they need to put in more time and effort, and having kids is not conducive to that because kids are quite take up quite a bit of your time. So those people decide that I'm not going to have kids because it's not in line with my goals. So those people are the kinds I would call child free. They are not doing it out of like a moral compunction against having kids. They're just doing it for like, they're like it's so that they can better serve their goals. At least that's how I understand what child free is. Then there are like anti-natalists. Anti-natalists are different from child free people in the sense that they hold a belief that it is morally impermissible to give birth to sentient beings. Uh, so they have a certain, like, now if I'm using anti-realist kind of language, they have certain preferences against having children. Um, so that's sort of the defining criteria for being an anti-natalist. Like, so if you are someone who believes that it is morally impermissible to give birth to sentient beings, children, uh, then that's sufficient for you to be an anti-natalist. Now there's some overlap. There are child-free people who are also anti-natalists, and antinatal. There are anti-natalists who are not child-free in the sense that they have already had kids and they've arrived at anti-natalism afterwards. So they now believe that it's morally impermissible to give birth to children, but at some point they did not believe it, so they had children, but now they have had a shift of personality. So yeah, that's sort of the distinction I'm making over here. And the scope of the article is limited to antinatalists. It's not talking about child-free people. More power to child-free people. Like, you have certain goals, you have certain ways of achieving them. Go ahead. Like, I have no qualms with you. You get to live your life. Um, the scope of the article is with respect to antinatalism, not even antinatalists per se. Like, I'm not even talking about the people, I'm rather talking about the view itself, that it's impermissible to have kids. So yeah, so the next section is sort of like me just elaborating on what my antinatalist arc was, and I think I've already sort of um, said a bit about it, but I'll elaborate a little bit. The basic idea is that just in virtue of me existing, just by virtue of me existing, I am contributing to the demand of crops. I'm contributing to the demand of dark chocolate, and I'm contributing to the demand for, like, I don't know, plastic and fossil fuels or whatever that is expected to be contributed to, given that an individual exists. And given that I'm contributing to these things, I am doing something that's bad. And if we give birth to children, they would come into existence and they would contribute to all of these things which are bad. Now, there are antinatalists who would say that, like, I have gotten antinatalists to say that it's better for antinatalists to just kill themselves. Uh, Not that I advocate it, but they have said it. Um, I've also gotten antinatalists to say that it would be good for me to kill myself, but I am too scared of doing it. Again, I'm not advocating they do any of that. But yeah, the idea is that there's some confusion with respect to, like, morality. Like, after getting clarity on crop deaths and all of these things, like, I'm no longer persuaded that whatever those things are, they are, like, morally bad. um so yeah, That's part of why I started being an anti-natalist, is because I was being led to believe that I'm doing something bad in virtue of existing, and if I bring more people into existence, I'll be contributing to something that's bad. So the way to prevent that from happening is to just refrain from bringing people into existence. So that's so the long and short of how I started being one. And I've had some, like, even my friend, like, Gaurav, who is the co-host of the Vegan Veranda podcast. Um, he was a natalist through and through. Like, even when we started being friends, he was like a natalist, and he, like, even though he didn't like agree with me, he also didn't like give me a lot of grief for it. He didn't push back, but I think it's just that he had faith in my ability to just reason myself out of it. So yeah, like I had a company, and I had, like, that did not help me get rid of my confusion, and because of the confusion, I think I was being an anti-natalist. But then things changed. My company changed. The people I surround myself with changed, and I get more clarity on my views. So when I got a bit more woke on the philosophy behind, like, ethics and normative ethics, meta ethics, descriptive ethics, all of these things, um, that's when I started examining my views about antinatalism itself, and even veganism. Like, I wouldn't say veganism is something that I am, um, how should I say it? It's not beyond, it's not beyond examination. Like, it's not beyond introspection. I would introspect about my views with respect to veganism as well, if I'm given a good reason to do that. But yeah, like, with as this happened, I started like talking about my views to other people in these communities, and I got quite a bit of pushback, which I think sort of made me, reconsider my views, um, or re-examine them. Not even reconsider them. It's like, do I actually have these kind of preferences? That's the kind of conversation I was having with myself. So I think we can go to the next section in the article.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that in your hypocrisy video, what I really liked about it was that you said that so far no one has given me an example of me being, a hypocrite. You were very open. You're saying, I don't think it will happen, but I'm open to hearing if someone has an example. So
Yeah, absolutely. If there is someone who can point out to a case that, like, I think this is one of those cases. This was not in line with my values. Maybe my values changed, but I don't think that's true. I've always I'll get to that, but yeah, I don't think my values particularly changed. It's just that I got more clarity about it. But we can talk about it. I even put like a picture of this antinatalist, like, starter pack, which was funny to me because a lot of this stuff was stuff that I have done. So I've, like, I haven't I haven't joined r/nihilism. I haven't joined r/sanctioned suicide. Um, I haven't. There was a, yeah. I'm not a big fan of, like, in Mandem, or like whatever this guy's name is. Um, and, like, yeah, like, the big red button thing was something that confused me. I used to have, like, really uh, apprehensive attitudes about breeders, um, and, like, yeah, like, yeah. Oh, the Benatarian asymmetry. It's interesting because I actually didn't think that it made sense even when I was an antinatalist. I couldn't put my finger on it because I wasn't taking a very, like, an analytic approach to it. But once I started doing that, it's when I realized that there was something weird. I had read a paper, like a philosophy paper, but I think it was written by Eric Magnusson, who wrote about how to reject the Benatarian asymmetry. But at the time, I kind of thought that that paper was a bit too heavy for me. It was a bit too like I didn't comprehend it properly, so I sort of tabled it for later. But then I realized that this is a bit. This is kind of easy to talk about, and we'll get into that.
And who are the people on the right exactly?
Oh, so this the guy on the top, I don't know who that is, but I suspect it's some FList anti-natalist guy. The guy on the bottom is a famous anti-natalist, FList kind of person. This guy, I think his name is in Mendham, um, and there's like he has some he has a I don't remember what his YouTube channel was, but he was one of like the big online celebrity, or I wouldn't say a celebrity, but he was an online like figure who had like a decent following, who was promoting anti-natalism. um yeah. um so I guess we can skip to the section. This I wouldn't go through the entire thing, because I think this is sort of like I think it's particularly it's pretty comprehensive. Like if someone wants to read this, they'll find it pretty comprehensive. But I'll still sort of give you a brief nutshell version of it. Basically, the idea is that there are domains of philosophy, and ethics is one of the domains of philosophy. And ethics is further understood as a like it has further branchings, and the other branches are descriptive ethics, normative ethics, applied ethics, and meta ethics. Now I give the example of veganism and antinatalism as applied ethics. So those are applied ethics. But why are they called applied ethics? Is because they are sort of derivatives of one's normative ethical views. Now what's a normative ethical view? It's like the kinds of values you have. You have a value against killing people. You have a value against lying. You have a value against stealing food from hungry children. You have a value against scamming the government. You have a value against cheating on your partner. Stuff like that. So all of these are like your norms, your values. And what comes under normative ethics is that we try to lay out our norms on a platter, and we try to see which theory best captures all of our norms. So there are like theories within normative ethics, the classic deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics. Like these are very common, classic sort of normative ethical theories. So, for example, deontology is just a theory which captures right and wrong as being like rules. So we have certain rules. If you violate a rule, if you violate a value, that's bad. And if you uphold a rule, that's good. Um, and if you do some like so that's basically deontology. And then there's utilitarianism. So utilitarianism is like there are versions of it, but the classical kind of utilitarian position is that if an action maximizes utility, then the action is good. If an action maximizes suffering, or it minimizes um, well-being, the action is bad. uh, so that's the kind of stuff we are talking about. So like well-being and suffering, so you can do like a calculus on which this action increases well-being, but it also increases suffering, but on the net it is more well-being than suffering, so it's preferable. But if it causes more suffering than well-being, then the action is bad. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about when we're talking about utilitarianism. Um, and all of our applied ethics are sort of applications of our normative ethical views to real life problems. So we have certain values, and as a derivative of those values, we are talking about whether we should kill and eat animals, or whether we should harm people, or like steal their kidneys and sell them in the black market or something like that. That's all of that is applied ethics. And meta ethics is about ethics itself. So you're talking about ethics itself. You're talking about like the semantics of what it means to say something is good or bad. Um, but that's a whole different conversation. Uh, and the relevance of this is that antinatalism, like veganism, is an applied ethic, and you arrive at applied ethics through some. So you have certain normative values, and you arrive at antinatalism via those values, from those values. um so that's the kind of, so like if an action is like I also write that normative ethics concerns itself with like questions about whether this action is right or wrong, whether it's good or bad. And more like meta ethics concerns itself with questions like what does it mean for something to be good or bad, or what does it mean when I say something should be done, should not be done, stuff like that. And then we arrive at the first reason why. I also put a picture of like the red button. It's sort of like a classical thing that happens in utilitarian or antinatalist kind of conversations. The idea is there's a red button. If you press it, you will be end humanity. Um, so that it's sort of like an Easter egg. And yeah, after that we just come to the first section, where I give you the first reason why I decided that I'm not an anti-natalist anymore. I realized that I'm not an anti-natalist anymore. And the first reason is that it doesn't follow from my normative ethical theory. Now, what do I mean? So I have certain values, right? And there are certain theories which capture some of my values, and they fail to capture some of my values. For example, I have a value against killing people. Um, so roughly speaking, both utilitarianism and deontology sort of capture it, in the sense that if you kill someone, they'll suffer, so you're doing something bad. You're not gaining any like well-being from it, particularly that that is way higher than what suffering they will experience. So utilitarian captures my intuition about killing people. Deontology, I have like a rule against killing people, so I'm violating that rule, so it's bad. So deontology also captures that kind of view, but it this is a bit informal. So there's a more sort of um, there's a more classical way of doing it, and the way of doing that is used by consulting like the trolley problem. And I think probably most people will be familiar with the trolley problem. I even put like a picture of the trolley problem just above. Yeah. So the idea is just that there is a this is an altered version of the trolley problem, by the way. Uh, the actual version just has two tracks. There is one person on one track and five people on the other track. You have a trolley that's heading into the track with five people. So if you don't do anything, five people are going to be killed by the trolley running over them. But there's a switch in front of you, and if you pull the switch, if you change the tracks, the trolley will be redirected to the second uh, track, and one person will be killed. And the question is it permissible to pull that switch. Now, answers vary between people, but generally speaking, a deontologist would say it's impermissible. It's wrong to pull that switch and kill one person in order to save five people, because you're committing a rights violation. You're committing, there's a rule that you're breaking by switching the tracks and killing one person. You are killing one person. But if you just let it go, you didn't do anything. You didn't tie those people onto the tracks. You didn't set the trolley in motion. So you have no responsibility. That's what a deontologist would say, is that you shouldn't pull the lever. A utilitarian would say the opposite. A utilitarian would say, if I don't pull the switch, five people are going to die, as opposed to if I pull the switch, only one person is going to die. So it's permissible. In fact, I should pull the switch and save five people, as opposed to one person. So if you think about it, my values, my instant reaction to this question is to say that it's not okay to pull the lever at one person versus five people. However, if we keep scaling the numbers, let's say on track number one, instead of five people, you have 5 million people. And now the question is, do you pull the switch? In such situations, my intuitions would change. My intuition would be to pull the switch and prevent the deaths of 5 million people, um, as opposed to as opposed to not killing one person. So if there's one person on the track versus 5 million people, I would pull the lever. Now, this is sort of different from what a classical deontologist would say, and it's also different from what a classical it's not different from what a classical utilitarian would say. So basically, there's some threshold, some arbitrary threshold that I'm not aware of. I don't know where that threshold is. Maybe I can think of like an approximation, but I don't know exactly where the threshold is. But there is some threshold number of people, after which, if you keep increasing the numbers, I would change my view. I would say that, okay, now it's okay to pull the lever and save those many people. But below that threshold, I wouldn't be okay with pulling the lever and saving them. I wouldn't be okay with killing one person. So this kind of view is, it's kind of it's sort of like a pluralist view. So I have pluralist in the sense that I have both deontological as well as utilitarian kind of intuitions. So I have values from both sides. I have values from the deontologist. I also have values from the utilitarian. So this kind of pluralist kind of view is sort of referred to as threshold deontology. Um, Now there's some additional stuff here and there, um, but when like I could elaborate on those, but it's sort of not relevant to the article itself. And there is like an explanation that I give over here, that so there's an if an action, if someone's committing an action, uh, there's like some area this it could be, it could either be justified or it could be like unjustified, in the sense that I have a preference for it or against it. um, and I could be agnostic about it. I could be like, okay, I don't know whether you should pull the switch or not. So yeah, so roughly speaking, threshold deontology as a normative theory would best capture my views. Now, I think I go in more details in the article itself, but yeah, so that kind of theory captures my norms pretty accurately. And when I thought about antinatalism, I asked myself, do you think giving birth to children is a rights violation? If the answer is yes, then we have a problem. Um, then the question is that action, is that rights violation being outscaled by the utility difference, in the sense that is it a case where you are killing one, is it analogous to the case where you're killing one person to save 5 million people or something like that? But when I ask myself, I actually don't have a preference against just bringing people into existence. um, if there was a button and every time I press a button a person comes into existence, as long as like, and we have some constraints to the hypothetical, like, oh, this person will experience net well-being, they won't have like a horrible life. Given these constraints, I actually don't have a problem bringing someone into existence, which tells me that giving birth is not a rights violation on my view. I don't have a preference against bringing someone into existence in a vacuum. Um, and so that's one part. The so so now we have an action which is not a deontic rights violation. So the second consideration is, since it's not a deontic rights violation, is it now something that is um, worse than does it generate more suffering than well-being? That's the question. And now that's an empirical claim, and especially in case of like humans, um, I am not persuaded that sure, there could be certain cases like if somebody is giving birth in like Africa and they're like extremely poor, they don't have any food left for themselves, they can't feed their kids. If such a person gives birth, then they could be generating. Just give me a sec, there's someone at my door.
So thanks everyone for joining today. If any of you guys have any questions, you can leave it in the you can leave a comment potentially at the end, or we can have some Q&A sessions. So is anyone an anti-natalist watching the stream? So I've got a question. Have you been called to play Batman yet? No, I haven't. I've not been called to play Batman. But initially when I came across anti-natalism, I found it quite an interesting concept, but I reached out to some anti-natalists and I got very unconvincing answers. I
Yeah,
was just talking a little bit,
yeah,
I found it
I'm,
interesting, the idea. For
Mhm.
example, I think we'll see this a little bit later on, but my question was, what would happen with total rights violations if people, like, it could go the other way, like someone not being brought into existence, it could potentially increase total rights violation.
We
So
will talk about that. That's one of the considerations, right? Yeah. So the question is, does an action generate rights violation? That's question number one. The question number two is, does it generate um, disutility? Does it generate way more disutility than it generates well-being? So these are the kinds of considerations we're taking in when we are talking about whether the action to give birth to someone is good or bad. So I kind of lost my train of thought, but yeah, in the article, I kind of gave an explanation of threshold deontology itself, which is partially why I'm not elaborating very much. Um, but yeah, there is a graph on threshold deontology, which I think we can cover quickly. I think that should tell. that should be pretty like easy to go through. So yeah, so this graph credits to Dr. Avi Bitterman. He's the owner of the Study Archives server, and he is a good friend of Ask Yourself from the Ask Yourself Discord. And I got this graph from him. So basically, if you see the y-axis represents the moral value of a given action. Um, so, for example, if an action is good, you will find it typically um, on higher on the y-axis. And there's an x-axis which is black in color. And the idea is that given that so for some actions, um, let's say stealing. So stealing would have the blue line for stealing would be lower on the x-axis, but something like murder would be higher. The blue line would be higher for murder if you're talking about murder. And for that action, there's going to be a corresponding well-being or suffering that's generated. So if I steal, I get some well-being. Like if I steal something, maybe I steal like a food product, I get some benefit out of it. I get some well-being. Maybe like I really enjoy having it. Um, but I also generate some bad consequences. I generate um, disutility for the guy selling it. Um, and also like I'm doing something. I'm violating a rule that I have. Um, so yeah. So now the question is, when deciding whether a given act of stealing is bad, you're thinking about where that blue line is, and whether the well-being you receive from performing that action is above or below that line. Because if it is on, above, or below, then it's not the case that the action is justified. Um, yeah, if it's on, yeah, on the line, you don't know it, you're agnostic. If it's below the line, you are it's bad to perform that action, and if it's above that line, it's permissible to perform that action. So that's kind of what this graph is representing. Deontology is being represented by the blue line. Utilitarianism is represent or consequentialism, especially, is being represented by the red line. And the red line basically just says that if an action is uh, the more well-being an action generates, the better the action is. If it's generating suffering on the net, then the action is bad. If it's generating well-being on the net, then the action is good. That's what consequentialism is. And threshold deontology is sort of a pluralist view. So you have some so you can see that there is a purple line, and purple line is the threshold deontologist. So for some given action, if the action is below the blue line, a threshold deontologist would say that the action is um, like impermissible. But then as you keep scaling the well-being, there's some point which is basically the point where the blue line, uh, the black axis, the y-axis, and the purple line, they meet at one single point. And above that, on the positive x side and on the positive y side, if your action is lying over there, then your action is justified. That's the kind of stuff a threshold deontologist would say. um, so I need to make sure that like I'm being clear, so maybe you can moderate me and tell me if whatever I was saying makes sense.
Yeah. So, for example, a deontologist, like the moral value is just a fixed value, right? And
Yeah,
then, whereas a threshold deontologist, they would also value the well-being and suffering of the act. So
yeah.
you made your example was stealing, I think. So,
Hmm.
for example, if you're stealing and like there's so much extra well-being generated from it, So there potentially could be a point. So in the purple line, when it goes positive, that because the well-being is just so much being
Yeah,
generated, that it could be a morally good act.
right. So if the well-being generated outscales the deontic weight, so you can think about deontic weights in terms of points. So if you commit a bad action, you are assigned negative points. But if that action generates well-being, you're given positive points. And if your action generates suffering, you're given more negative points. So, for example, something like stealing would by default say have minus 10 points. Some action like murder would have like minus 10,000 or something like that. Um, Now the question is the amount of well-being. Say you steal something that's relatively cheap. It generates negligible amount of suffering. But stealing that thing gave you immense pleasure. Let's say it gave you 15 points of pleasure, and you performed an action that was like a negative 10. So now the aggregate is a plus 5, which means that the action was good on threshold deontology.
Yeah, makes sense. And then the consequentialist, he just has, if I understand, there's not like a deontic built into it. It's just scaling with the well-being generated. There's like not a
Yep.
deontic base.
Yeah. So if someone is a consequentialist, like a classical utilitarian, all they're going to do is take the amount of well-being generated, take the amount of suffering generated, subtract the numbers, and if you get a positive number, um, wait, yeah, if you get a positive number, the action is good. If you get a negative number, the action is bad. So say my action generates 10 well-being points, but my action also generates 15 suffering points. The aggregate is a minus 5, so the action was bad. But if my action generated 20 well-being points and 15 suffering points, then according to utilitarianism, the action is good or permissible.
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
that's kind of the, yeah, that's for a classical utilitarian. But we also talk about negative utilitarians. So negative utilitarian is someone who only values suffering. They don't care about um, well-being. So a negative utilitarian doesn't care about well-being at all. They don't care. So for example, an action which generates well-being but does not generate any suffering would be like neutral for them. Um, and if the action generates suffering, then the action is bad. And you also have like relative good and bad. So if an action generates 20 suffering points versus an action that generates 100 suffering points, the action that generates 100 suffering points is worse than the um, action which generates 20 suffering points. So a negative utilitarian is just someone who only values suffering as a only cares about suffering as a value. They don't care about well-being. um, and the reason I mention anti negative utilitarianism is because a lot of um, anti-natalists think that because since they're like um, they well, I'm not sure if most antinatalists are negative utilitarians, but some amount of negative utilitarians are antinatalists. And I think they are thinking like, oh, if I'm bringing someone into existence, I'm bringing negative, so I'm bringing suffering into existence. So I'm bringing someone into existence. They're going to suffer. So I'm generating suffering. Doesn't matter whether I'm generating well-being or not. All that it matters is that I'm generating suffering. And not just to that individual, maybe like if someone is like vegan inclined or vegan, they would also think about the suffering that is generated for the non-human animals that the person will be harming throughout their lifetime or whatever. So they think that, oh, it's just better that I don't give birth because, oh, now I'm not going to be bringing suffering into existence. So the person would be like, yeah, that's why I'm an antinatalist, is because it's going to like I'm just not interested in generating suffering, and this is an action that generates suffering. So firstly, I I'm not a negative utilitarian. Um, so I'm closer to like a threshold deontologist. I have like I have both deontic concerns as well as utility concerns, and I don't just value suffering. I also value well-being. So I am not persuaded that I should be an antinatalist given these normative views of mine. It doesn't seem to follow. Again, if someone wants to show that antinatalism follows from a threshold deontic um, framework, they are happy to like I'm happy to hear them make their case. But mind you that this is going to venture into some empirical things, because now it's clear to me that I don't care about I don't care in the sense I don't think it's a rights violation to bring someone into existence just in a vacuum. Is I don't think it's a bad thing to do. So if they have to convince me, uh, given the theory that captures my values, they have to show that uh, giving birth entails like way more suffering than it creates well-being. So I am not aware of such an empirical case. If someone wants to make that case, if someone has data to show me that, I'll be happy to take a look. Um, but given that lack of data, I am not persuaded that antinatalism follows from my normative ethical theory. Uh, so, so I'm not an antinatalist. That's so that itself is sort of sufficient for me to reject antinatalism. So that's just sort of the main critique, is that it just doesn't follow from my normative ethical views. If someone wants to make the case, well, you're welcome. Um, but this is the lack of that data is sufficient for me to not be an antinatalist. So far so good.
So far, so good, sir. As I understand, you don't believe bringing a person into existence that didn't exist before is a rights violation, and then what you would need is evidence that bringing a person, someone into existence, generates so much net suffering, right?
Hmm.
That it forces you to sort of say, okay, it's just so much suffering by this act that yeah, it's morally not good.
Yeah, net suffering and like even net rights violations or whatever. Uh, but yeah, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So that's just sort of like sufficient on its own. And whatever I so in theory, I could have just ended the article over here. I could have just say, oh, hey, like it just doesn't follow from my normative ethical views. So I'm not an antinatalist. Game over, right? So I could have done that. But there's some interesting stuff that I want to discuss, which is ignored by a lot of vegans as well. And given that I've written this for my vegan veranda kind of like a veganism podcast, I thought that including this stuff is important. So I'm talking about. So yeah, we can proceed to the next section basically. Um, and the next section just is telling that it's not even clear to me that antinatalism even follows from negative utilitarian itself. Um, because remember, just a sec. Yeah. So remember that for an antinatalist, if you have two actions, one generates both of them. Like if one generates 20 points suffering, the other generates 100 points suffering. Both will be bad, but one is better than the other. The one that generates less suffering is better than the other. So we ought to do the actions which generates the least amount of suffering, given negative utilitarianism. So there's an empirical component over here. Now the question is, fine, giving birth to someone will generate suffering, but the question is, does it generate more suffering than it would if this person was not being brought into existence? And that's the kind of question that we are talking about in this section. Um, so this section is it's also a bit controversial because a couple of people have misinterpreted whatever I've written in this section. Um, so like I kind of find I feel compelled to make this clarification. This section is not so. There's a concept of there's a distinction between internal critiques and external critiques. So if I say something like,
Have you've muted yourself?
yeah, I'm back.
Yeah.
Okay. So an internal critique, it differs from an external critique in one way, and maybe there are other ways, but the main way it differs is that so say for example you have like a set of values. So you have like value A, value B, value C, and I let's say I don't have value A, I have value X instead of value A, and that's why I don't have certain applied ethical view, right? That will be an external critique. So if I am trying to like say that, oh, value having value A has wild sort of implications. Like for example, if someone is like a negative utilitarian, they only care about like suffering. I can come up with scenarios where only caring about suffering is counterintuitive to my like it's not intuitive to me basically. So for example, if somebody is being painlessly killed, um, think so on a negative utilitarian view. So if somebody is existing, they're going to experience suffering. Whether they experience well-being or not is irrelevant, but this person is going to be experiencing suffering. But if I just if someone just decides to kill this person and they do it painlessly such so that there is no suffering generated to that person, and we also ensure that nobody else suffers as a result, this person has no family, no friends that will suffer as a result of their death and stuff like that. If we build those into consideration, yeah, if we take those into consideration, it would be like better to just kill that person. But as a threshold deontologist, that's not a view I have. So I think like that's just like a crazy entailment of being a negative utilitarian. So that's an external critique. Wait one sec. No, that will be an internal critique because I'm taking some set of values, um, and I'm deriving something that's like I'm deriving like a different conclusion. So for example, if I say, oh, these values they lead to this, like the opposite conclusion, so that will be sort of like an internal critique. I can also think of like name the trait, for example. Name the trait is again an internal critique. So what name the trait does, like in a veganism context, is you take the values of a person and you derive like a contradiction out of it, or you derive like an absurdity from their view. And what you're doing is not accepting whatever values they have, but you're just deriving like an absurdity or a contradiction from those views. So you aren't changing anything, you're not attacking something about like you're not attacking the original set in the sense. I'm not sure if that makes sense. But yeah, what you're doing is you're keeping that constant and you're like deriving an absurdity or a contradiction. So this section also talks about an internal critique. It's not talking about an external critique where you have like an argument and some I'm rejecting some premise and I'm falsifying some premise or something like that. That's the kind of stuff when I'm talking about when I mean like a an external critique. What I'm doing here is I'm taking the set of values that a person has and I'm deriving something that's not in line with my values.
So
So
for so for example,
yeah.
if I was going to give an internal critique of negative utilitarianism, like for example, if I said, for example, if I knew later on in someone's life they were going to get extremely painful disease, and then I could just murder them so they don't get this disease. So
Hmm.
so you're reducing suffering, right?
Yep.
So would that be an internal critique, or would
Yeah,
that?
that's one. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's the critique is that a negative utilitarian would be committed to saying that that will be a good thing to do. They wouldn't be committed to saying it's a good thing, but they would be committed to saying that um, that state of affairs is better than the state of affairs where you kill the person is better than the state of affairs where they die, they suffer and get like tortured by like a disease or something like that. And I think that runs counter to my intuitions. I wouldn't be okay with killing someone just because in the future they might have like have a like a deadly disease or something like that. I'm not okay with killing them. um, so that would be an internal critique. um, so what I'm levying here is also an internal critique. What I'm doing is I'm just taking, so I don't have negative utilitarian values, but what I'm doing is, let's say someone has negative utilitarian values. All I'm saying is, even given those values, it's not clear to me that you arrive at antinatalism, and that's kind of what we discuss over here. um, and it's basically like, I'm just giving them a case. So word A, people stop breeding, and world B, people continue breeding. So if people continue breeding, the population is going to increase. If people stop breeding, at some point there's going to be like a decline in the population. And when there's a decline in the population, what's going to happen is a lot of space that was previously taken over by humans is going to be vacant. And let's say, let's even extend it even further. Let's say humans eventually just go extinct. So now all of the area that was previously occupied by humans is now vacant, and up, but humans aren't alone on this planet. There are other animals that live in the planet. They have like lived before humans came onto the planet, before we evolved. um, and they will exist after we are gone, assuming that we don't we don't kill them all or something like that. um, which is also an interesting tangent, but we'll get there. But yeah, so if humans go extinct, what's going to happen is all of these vacant areas are going to be um, exploited by these animals, in the sense that they're going to start breeding in order, and they're going to be increasing their population. So when human population goes down, the population of animals would go up. And the the problem with that is there's a hell lot of suffering in the wildlife. In fact, the wildlife might actually be some of the it might be home to some of the worst atrocities um, that have been seen. It's just insane the amount of suffering that a wild animal has to endure in its life. Um, they have to endure they have to endure the elements, temperatures, the hot climate, the cold climate, um, the heat, the sun. They also have to endure thirst, starvation, um, just being like nutrient deficiencies, not getting enough food, also like getting injured, parasitic infections or like bacterial infections, viral infections. And most importantly, they have, especially some animals, not all animals, but a subset of animals in the wild, have this looming danger that a literal predator is going to pounce on you and tear you to shreds. Um, so that kind of stuff is absent from like the average human's life. The average human is never going to have a is never going to be ripped into shreds by like a tiger or like a lion or whatever. Um, but that's kind of the fate of herbivorous animals. Um, so what's going to happen is we are going to be replacing whatever suffering that humans had with this suffering that's clearly way worse. Like if I had a choice between being a human and being a wild animal, I'll any day choose being a human. I don't want to be ripped open by um, a Komodo dragon or something like that and get my insides eaten while I'm still alive. Like no, no thanks. I'm happy being a human. Um, so and anyone who disagrees is welcome to go to Africa and like replace one of the deer, like and get eaten instead of them. But yeah, the this is some side point. But yeah,
No, yeah,
the
yeah, I
overall
agree. Yeah, apart from humans and companions, animals, companion animals, or yeah, the world is a terrible place for everyone else.
yeah. So as a consequence of the decline of humans, you're gonna see an increase in the wildlife population. And when that happens, you're going to be seeing more suffering than you would have if you would have just bred people into existence. Uh, so now the question is, why would we think that breeding people into existence is causing more suffering than um, not breeding? So, because the ultimate value over here is whether an action is generating more suffering or not, right? Which action is generating more suffering relative to the other action? And I don't think that the negative utilitarians have the kind of empirical backing to say that um, we, you know, humans existing is going to generate more suffering than if humans did not exist. Um, yeah, so I am not convinced that this is true. So that's so I'm not convinced that even on a negative utilitarian uh, normative ethic, antinatalism follows.
Yeah, and by convinced, you're saying you don't know for sure, but it's just like the intuition, right? So
Yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
don't.
So I mean, I have like the intuition that even if you're talking about humans, if you're talking about human lives, uh, so when human lives are being so the reason why you're against breeding is because humans will suffer, right? But let's say they suffer. Let's say you bring them into existence, but on the net there is less suffering relative to if you did not breed, because even if you did not breed, there's going to be suffering because the animals are suffering, and we don't have the technology to wipe out all life from the planet. um, we don't have the technology, we can't, like I don't think we have enough like radioactive material to um, nuke all the terrestrial land as well as the deep marine ecosystems. I think Dr. Ravi had like a calculation that I remember him performing back in the day. This is like really old. That even if you take all the uranium that's available on Earth and turn them into like the biggest atom bombs, like the most destructive atom bombs in existence, and you nuke the planet, you might be able to get rid of all the terrestrial kind of or like all the terrestrial land. You'll kill all the animals over there, but we just don't have enough radioactive material to nuke the deep sea. The oceans are just like we won't be able to kill animals inside. So And now these animals will grow in the, like, they will face the radioactive background, and they will suffer as a result of that, because radiation induces like mutations and cancers and stuff like that. So these animals will survive, they will reproduce, but they will also suffer extra because of this radioactive background, that now they have like cancers and stuff. So they might have like, um they might have smaller lifespans, but it's not going to stop them from breeding. So even if you use all the technology that's available to us right now, the most destructive technology, that is available to us right now, we still won't be able to get rid of all the sentient life. But let me go even further. Even if you get rid of all the sentient life on the planet, you aren't destroying all matter. Uh, so life evolved from matter. There was some point in the past where there was just matter and there was no life. Uh, and living organisms evolved out of, um, just like matter. So atoms collide and they form molecules, and these molecules interact and they form living organisms, right? So even if you get rid of all the sentient life, you aren't eliminating the possibility that life would just re-evolve, like, de novo. And
Yeah, in a few million years or whatever.
yeah, and you're not going to get anti-natalist immediately after life evolves. After life evolves back into existence, you're going to get like a bunch of suffering animals. Like, until humans arrived, it was just like full of wild animal suffering. Then humans arrived, humans also suffered, humans also caused animal suffering. And then once humans are gone, these animals are going to still keep suffering. If these animals are also gone, life will, re-evolve, and then you'll have more suffering animals. So it's just not clear to me how antinatalism is leading to a world where there is net suffering. Sorry, where there is, less suffering relative to a world where you did breed. So even given even granting negative utilitarian values, it's not clear to me that you arrive at antinatalism. If anything, we probably arrive at the opposite. So if we breed more, human population increases, our use of resources increases, our demand for land increases, and we're going to be replacing some of this wild land and turn it into like human settlements, or like, um, other stuff that we need land for, and we are going to be displacing nature. So when we displace nature, these animals that would have come into existence in that area of land are not going to come into existence, and there could be just less suffering, as opposed to if you did not breed, because now you have displaced some of that land.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before. I think I told you that if like for example carnists just stopped existing,
Hmm.
the world could be a worse place, right? In total for like total rights violations.
Yeah, maybe like if all like, so if you're talking about colonies, it's probably like 99.99% of the population. If all of them go extinct, I'm not convinced that it'll particularly be a nice ride. I would rather that vegans slowly replace carnists in like the population, and once vegans have taken over the population, yeah, we, um, like, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. If we like, I would prefer, instead of killing all carnists, I would prefer vegans slowly replacing carnists as a population.
I see.
So I also mentioned in the article that if some carnist wants to be an antinatalist, and they will never go vegan, I would rather that the person be an antinatalist and does not breed.
That's fair enough. Yeah. And yeah, so another
Yeah.
point I had was, as we expand our infrastructure, someone brought this up to me, is that there's also, uh, I don't know how to quantify this, but there's suffering of, semi-wild animals inside urban areas. So, for me, my gut feeling is creating people will overall reduce suffering and rights violations. But yeah, I don't know how to quantify the suffering animals go through in cities or urban areas, to be honest. But
Yeah, that's interesting. But it's also important to notice that, like, I'm not even committing myself to like a positive claim. I'm not even saying that, oh, like there is going to be less suffering. The whole point is that it's underdetermined that giving birth is worse than not giving birth, and that's the kind of burden that lies with the antinatalists,
yeah.
to show that that actually is the case. I'm just not persuaded one way or the other. I don't think I have the empirics to say that. um, Also, as civilization kind of like changes, like once we like our um, the way we construct buildings changes. Like if you're thinking about something like a really well developed city, um I don't even know which city to put my hand on. Let's say London. So you could say something like London versus um maybe like maybe like a city in like a third world country or something like that. You would probably have that kind of issue more with the third world country where there's like a problem with sanitation and stuff like that. um, so you have like people throwing waste in the open so animals can feed on them, and then for example, rats can um, populate the area. They can survive off of the leftover food and stuff like that. um, and there's also like birds and others who also feed on these leftover foods. So where you have sanitation issues, I think you are more expected to see these kinds of semi wild animal kind of situations there. But a city that's roughly higher on the sanitation index, I don't think you would see as much of a problem relative to a city where there is a lack of sanitation, if you know what I
Mhm.
mean.
Yeah. And the reason going back to a point earlier on, the reason I asked you just for if there's any antinatalists listening, you're not making a positive like a claim
Right.
that making creating people will reduce rights violation. You're just saying it's possible, right?
Yeah. I'm just saying that it is underdetermined that even given an antinatalist framework, it's underdetermined that the action is bad. Like we have no reason to think that, uh, and by reason I mean some kind of empirical evidence, to think that giving birth generates more suffering than not giving birth. Um, so that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So I'm not even committing myself to saying that, yeah, giving birth actually does um, you know decrease overall suffering. I'm not even committing myself. I'm actually agnostic about that. So I'm not even committing myself to that. I'm just saying that it's underdetermined, and I'm happy to be persuaded. Like if some antinatalist has some evidence to say that there's more suffering. um, Also, I think I even saw um, like a comparison. um, yeah, like there was a study. I don't remember, like it's very hazy, like my memory is pretty hazy, but it was like it compared the density of animals in a given area, um, for like a city and like a urban kind of setting, a rural urban kind of setting versus a wild uh, you know um, environment. And they like yeah yeah, I don't remember. I don't want to make some like erroneous statement. I'll yeah maybe we'll talk about it if I remember. But yeah, um anyway, yeah,
And
so
yeah,
I'm not making like a positive claim. I'm actually agnostic about it. So I just think that it's underdetermined to think that even under like an antinatalist negative utilitarian kind of framework, antinatalism follows. um yeah, that's pretty much it for this section. There's
and
like a
like
formal argument that we can probably look at. This argument, I took the argument
yeah,
from Dr. Ravi.
and yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
to do with going like that. There could be suffering going on in like other places of the universe, right?
right. Yeah. So basically, the main argument is that if antinatalism results in more suffering over a total span of time the universe is around, then a negative utilitarian ought not be an antinatalist. So this is just so P1 is just like is this what is this what negative utilitarian means? So if an antinatalist, if like given an negative utilitarian kind of setup, if an action increases suffering relative to not performing that action, you ought not perform that action. Um, so it's just like a derivative of of negative utilitarianism. So that's what P1 says. P1 says if antinatalism generates more suffering, um, the total time the universe is around, then a negative utilitarian should not be an antinatalist. And then there's just more exponents on that. People who want to learn about more exponents can check out our prop logic sessions.
Yeah, we have already 10 plus lessons on the full proof mastery channel, and then it's quite
Yep,
interesting, and this argument is quite simple compared to the ones we've seen
we are
within
talking about, yeah, exactly, yeah.
so
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 yeah,
I'll just say for P1 we're just assuming that if you have the antecedent which is true, we're just going to assume the consequent is also true, right? So is this what you
yeah.
mean when you say P1 is straightforward on negative
Yeah,
utilitarianism?
so what that means is that just by nature of what it means to be a negative utilitarian, P1 is true. It's just by definition. Like if by definition of negative utilitarianism, if an action generates more suffering than not performing it, then we should not perform it. No wait, yeah, we should not perform it. Right. So that's it's just what a negative utilitarianism entails. So that's P1, and then you have P2 where is just that P2 is just saying that antinatalism results in more suffering over the total span of time the universe is around. Um, and there's an argument for P2, which is the next argument. The conclusion is that the negative utilitarian ought not be an antinatalist. Now, notice that this argument is limited to like the scope of the argument is only like the target audience is just negative utilitarian antinatalists. Someone can be an antinatalist but not be a negative utilitarian. They could be like a deontologist who just has a deontic rule against giving birth, and they just don't care about suffering, they just don't care about well-being. All they care about is you are breaking a rule whenever you're giving birth to children, and that's enough for them. Like they can be, if they're deontological, this argument is not targeting those people, but I suspect you won't find too many people like that. But yeah, this is not for those people. This is targeted only at those people who are negative utilitarians. Yeah, so there is an argument for P2 over here, and the argument for P2 just is that so if you take an action where like so you take a world where you give birth to people, and you take a world where you don't give birth to people. So what you're doing is when you are instantiating the world where we stop giving birth, where everyone stops giving birth, we are eliminating a possible world. We are eliminating a world where um, humans develop the technology to like make like a huge space patrol kind of thing, like sentience, like intergalactic sentience patrol kind of thing, where we just go around the universe destroying all the planets with suffering. You're eliminating that possibility, as opposed to if you are being like a natalist, that option is still true. Like even if you're like giving birth, um, it's like it doesn't prevent that world from coming into existence. Like if you're an antinatalist, there's just no way that the world where humans, the descendants of humans, are going to be like generating this spaceship which goes around destroying sentience throughout like the universe. So that's the first premise. So if antinatalism prevents a world where humans evolve technologically and obliterate rest of the suffering in the universe by traveling in like a spaceship and destroying all the biological life there and uploading them to like a suffering free space. It's like talking about like transhumanism. Like you go there, you basically take these beings out of their you know mortal bodies and you upload them to like a cloud space where they just experience infinite bliss and they just don't experience any suffering. um, by so then antinatalism results in more suffering over the total span of the universe, a time the universe is around. So that's just what P1 is. P2 is that antinatalism prevents a world where humans technologically evolve and they obliterate rest of the suffering in the universe. And the conclusion is that antinatalism results in more suffering. So
So basically, if we're not reproducing, there'll be less, scientists, less technological development. This is sort of what it's getting at. So then,
yeah,
so
so there you are eliminating the world. So if humans go extinct, there's no scientist left to you know create these spaceships which will go around like on an intergalactic space travel and destroy all of these other sentient life on the planet, or like uploading them to like a sentient free sorry a suffering free space. Um, so by being an anti-natalist you're preventing that world from coming to existence. So, but if you were not an anti-natalist, then you still have scope for that world to come into existence.
yeah, I'm following.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, the aim of the argument, the whole point is to show that underdetermination. It's to show that it's underdetermined that um, antinatalism, sorry, negative utilitarianism even leads to antinatalism, and that's because like all of this evidence is unavailable to us. And yeah, so and I also like talk about how someone can have like just a deontic rule, and this argument does not apply to those people. Someone could just be like, oh, it's just I just have a rule against having kids, and I would just ask them like I would just tell them I don't have such a rule, and if they want to persuade me and like give me reasons to have such a rule, they are welcome to do that. But again, I don't think anybody has been successful in that endeavor. um, and I've also noticed that the people who seem to say that they are like deontological about having kids, upon examining their values, even them, it's sort of like they seem confused. Like like you would ask them, okay, you think it's like a deontic rights violation to have kids, right? So what if we created kids that will never suffer and they will never have any um, diseases or like disorders or whatever, and they will just experience like infinite bliss? Is it still bad to have those kids? And some people would just say, no, it's not bad. So ultimately, it seems even though they are saying that they have a deontic rule against it, they don't seem to have a deontic rule. Like it all sort of boils down to whether the whole suffering and the calculus of whether which this one generates more suffering or not. So yeah, that's another like observation. I'm not saying that the vast majority of people are like this or something like that. It's just a few instances that I've observed.
Yeah, for me, if someone has a deontic rule, they like. I don't realize why people have a deontic rule if there's no reason for having the rule, you know? So for
Yeah,
I can understand the deontic rule against murdering someone, but yeah, if someone says, for example, they've got a deontic rule against not breeding, then they'll, I personally like need some sort of understand why, or if why it sort of aligns with my preferences or something like
yeah,
this.
yeah. So there could just be like, for instance, um, I just don't have any like further like reasons why I don't like if there was someone who is um like if someone just exists and like you just went and killed them without suffering, like they just didn't know that they are dead, like one moment they're alive, the other moment they're dead. uh that would be against my values. Doing that would be against my values, but I just don't have any like further value to appeal to. Like that's just, it's just like a like I don't know why I have that preference, but I do have that preference against killing that person, even if even if it is done in a way that is painless and like they would never know that they died and stuff like that. So it could be that like someone might have like an intuition like that, but I'm just not, I don't have that.
Yeah, I've spoken with a few vegans who have a deontic rule against, use of sort of animal products in any sort of instance, and
Yeah.
for example, lab flesh, and
Hmm.
yeah, I haven't
Yeah, it
seen
doesn't make sense.
substantial.
Like even if like all like one pinprick versus like the entire animal holocaust just being perpetuated like in uh, like perpetually, they would be like, no, like I still won't do that one pinprick.
Yeah, for me, it's
Yeah, it's just
yeah, a
a
bit
thing.
straight.
Yeah. So yeah, the next section is about Benatarian asymmetry. Um, and I think I said that even when I was an antinatalist, I did not find it like interesting. Like I also didn't like, I didn't think it makes sense at all. Oh, we have some comments.
Hunter Toby saying a lot of times they will say it's wrong because the kid can't consent to being brought into existence, but WTF does it mean for a non-existent being to be able to consent or not?
Yeah, I think I even mentioned it somewhere over here. Like they say that. Yeah, I remember writing it in the article somewhere. Um, sorry.
Bless you.
Uh, thanks.
And the logical consistency is asking, do you consent to a virtual hug?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So the next thing is like, are there any more like comments that we should
That's
go?
that's everything for now.
Okay. 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 So the next part is about Benatarian asymmetry. Um, it's a bit it's a bit weird. Um, so David Benatar is like a, I think he's an academic philosopher who came up with the Benatarian asymmetry, and he has published a book, and in the book he gave this representation, and the book is called "Better to Have Never Been" or something along those lines. Um, I think that's the name of the book. And in the book he gives this example. So it's sort of like a thought experiment, and we are hypothetical respecters. So we won't say hypothetical though. We will just engage with the hypothetical. And here the hypothetical is scenario A, X. So some human being, for example, X, some human exists. Scenario B, that human being doesn't exist and never and will never exist. So in scenario A, you have boxes 1 and 2, and he says that if a human exists, that human will experience some amount of pleasure, and they will also experience some amount of pain. So you have like pleasure and pain both. So he says the fact that this being experiences pleasure is good. Now that's uncontroversial. He also says that the fact that this being experiences pain is bad. That's also uncontroversial. Then he says in scenario B, um, where the individual does not exist, they won't experience any well-being, and they won't experience any suffering. The fact that they don't experience any suffering is good, and the fact that they don't experience any well-being is not bad. It's neither good, it's not bad. So he says that there is some fundamental asymmetry um, between these two scenarios, and I'm not sure whether he thinks that it entails antinatalism or not. But yeah, that's one of the things. So even if someone grants this kind of asymmetry, like even if someone is accepting the Benatarian asymmetry, it's not clear to me that it entails antinatalism. So that's one. That's one way of attack, one line of attack. The other line of attack is that the other line is sort of like a semantic analysis way of attacking it. So what I think is that there is an equivocation between what good and bad here mean. Um, so I suspect that in one case he's using good and bad in one sense, and in the other case he's using good and bad in like a different sense. So there's like an equivocation.
Yeah, I think I saw a video on this actually. I think like one of them is being used as a counterfactual. So um, absence
Yeah,
of absence of pain, uh, good. I think one of them is being used as a counterfactual. I think, and I can't remember the way the other one is being used, but like I think the way he did it in the video was he said that absence of pain. No, yeah, absence of pain. He wrote good. It should be like not bad instead of good or something like this.
yeah. So for instance, if you just ask me, like as a subjectivist, if you give me this scenario, like just put onto the fact that someone is experiencing pain, that is bad. Like just if you just look at the fact that they are experiencing pain. So I'm talking about scenario A, and scenario B, the fact that they experience pleasure is good. So and by good and bad, I just mean that I have a preference against it or I have a preference for it. Um, but in scenario B, the fact that there is no pain and there is no pleasure, I would just not have any particular attitude towards it.
Hey, when you say
So
scenario B, which one are you talking about?
scenario B is the case where the human does not exist,
Okay,
the
so just
being does not exist.
X never
Yeah,
exists, right?
yeah. So when X never exists, uh, I don't have like a positive attitude or a negative attitude towards anything. So if like that, like on my semantics of good and bad, like there would be no asymmetry because the second column, the scenario B would both be neutral and neutral.
So not bad for both cases, right? So
Yeah, not bad or not good. Like I'll just say neutral. So
okay.
the fact that that there is no pleasure, no pain, it's just neutral. Like in both cases, it's neutral, and on the other side, it's good and bad. So there is no like asymmetry if you think about it. But what I'm trying to do in the article is to see, like that's sort of a trivial way of thinking about this. Like trivially, if I'm like an anti-realist, like a subjectivist in private usage of language, it's just like trivial. Like on my usage, there is no asymmetry. But what I'm trying to do over here is to interpret it in a different way. So, and depending on what those interpretations mean, I'm trying to see if there is an asymmetry or not. So, like, I'm thinking of alternative ways in which Benatar might be using the words good and bad. And given those interpretations, is there actually an asymmetry given? That's kind of what I'm looking at. So that's what I go over in this particular section. So what I look at, so the first interpretation is when he says pleasure, the presence of pleasure is good. I'm asking what does that mean? So this again, this is something I realized when I was talking to Sachin. So shout out to Sachin. So yeah, so we are asking over here is what does it mean? What does he want to say when he says the presence of pleasure is good? So one interpretation is he means that if we add pleasure to a system, then the system becomes better. Okay, that's uncontroversial. Like we agree that if there is a system and you add pleasure into that system, then that system is going to become better. So that's not a problem. Then the other term is the other statement is that the presence of pain is bad. Now, what does that mean? So, if we interpret that to mean that if we add pain to a system, then the system becomes worse. So, even that's uncontroversial. So, we agree on that semantics. And then the next is absence of pain is good. Now, if that means that if pain is removed from a system, then the system becomes better. So again, this is uncontroversial. We don't disagree with Benatar if that's what he means. Um, and then the last one is absence of pleasure is not bad. So, and the interpretation is if we remove pleasure from a system, then the system doesn't become worse. So, on that semantics, we actually disagree. So, on my view, if there is a system and you remove pleasure from that system, that is actually a bad thing. So if you think about it, like if you interpret it in that sense, the diagram would be presence of pain bad, presence of pleasure good, absence of pain good, absence of pleasure bad. So the symmetry has been restored. You see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Maybe you should. Maybe you could write that, or did you write that anywhere in the article? Like that,
Uh,
the absence of pleasure. So absence of pleasure is like a bad thing, right?
yeah. So the apps I did write that. So if you check so under interpretation one, check the last bullet point. Absence
Uh,
of pleasure is not bad.
so so according to based on your values, absence of pleasure is bad, right?
Is bad, yes. So we disagree here. We don't think absence of pleasure is not bad. We think that absence of pleasure, in the sense that if you remove pleasure from a system, then the system becomes bad. The system gets worse.
Oh,
So on this semantics, we actually disagree, and there is a symmetry that's going to be restored over here. So the fourth box in the diagram is not going to be not bad; it's going to be bad.
okay.
Um, so now
Yes,
you have like minus plus plus minus. So the symmetry has been restored.
I see. Yeah. For me, it would be clearer if I saw the table with you, filling it in, or
Yeah.
because
Okay. I'll take that. I'll. So the thing is, because I didn't generate this image, I'll have to it's fine. So I'll generate a diagram corresponding to the interpretation one, and say that okay, this now like the interpretation, like given this interpretation, this is the new table, and so there is no asymmetry.
yeah,
I'll
no, this
I'll do
this is
that. So
just an. It's not. It would just help me understand that point a little bit
yeah,
better
I get you. I get you. So I know. Yeah. So yeah, totally. So I'll sort of add that. Um,
if you
it's
can.
good that
But
you. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not gonna be like a particularly difficult thing to do. Um, Anyway, so that's interpretation one. Okay. And interpretation two is regarding limiting the number of possible words. So what does that mean? Okay. So the first statement is what was that? Presence of pain is bad. Okay. So I'm trying to interpret what Benatar means by that statement when he says presence of pain is bad. So the like in the second series of interpretations, I'm interpreting that to mean that if pain exists in the system, then that contributes to the system being bad. Okay, so it's sort of like a contributory reason. The fact that pain exists in a system contributes to the system being bad. So that's the first statement. The second statement is, if there is pleasure in the system, presence of pleasure is good, right? So that's the second statement. So I'm interpreting that to mean, if there is pressure, if pleasure exists in the system, that contributes to the system being good. So neither of those are controversial, we agree. um, and the third statement is, absence of pleasure is good. Now I'm interpreting that to mean, if pain is absent from a system, then it's a contributory reason for the system being good. And the reason why this is the case is that we are eliminating a bunch of worlds where there is net pleasure. Sorry, net suffering. So what does that mean? So when we say that pain is absent in the system, that contributes to the system being good. um, the fact that pain is absent in the system, it means that there's a bunch of systems where pain does not exist, and because pain does not exist, those systems don't have net suffering, because pain and suffering just doesn't exist in the system. And in virtue of that, uh, if pain is absent, that contributes to the system being good. um, Now the converse is that, if pleasure, the fourth statement is that absence of pleasure is good. And I'm interpreting that to mean, if pleasure is absent in a system, then it is a contributory reason for the system being bad. That's because when you remove all pleasure from a system, you get a bunch of worlds which have net suffering, or they are like neutral. So you are eliminating a bunch of worlds where there is net utility, net pleasure, more pleasure than suffering. All those worlds are eliminated because just pleasure does not exist in the system. So on this interpretation, there is no asymmetry, because um, the first box would be bad, second box would be good, third box would be good, and the fourth box would be bad. So again, there is no asymmetry. So just imagine this, the fourth one having bad instead of not bad. So on both interpretations, you're going to get a diagram where the fourth one says absence of pleasure is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's sort of what I and Sachin try to do, is to sort of interpret what Benatar is trying to say when he's saying that, pleasure, presence of pleasure is good, absence of pain is good, all of these things. um, and I suspect he's using good and bad in different senses, and that's probably why he's getting it. On my semantics, it's just going to be straightforwardly the case that on one side you have good and bad, on the other side you have neutral, so there is no asymmetry. um, on two different interpretations, like interpretation 1 and interpretation 2, you're going to get a case where you have bad good and good bad. Again, there is no asymmetry.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's not clear to me that there even is an asymmetry, so to speak. And even if there is, it's not clear to me that entails antinatalism.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think the video I saw potentially, I think had the two boxes on the right as not bad, not bad. So
Yeah. So yeah, even if you take that to be the case, again, it restores the symmetry, so there is no asymmetry. So even if you say absence of pain is not bad, um, absence of pleasure is not bad, there is no asymmetry. So again, yeah. However you want to do it, it's fine.
So then we're now moving on to
Yeah.
David
Oh yeah.
Benatar's response.
So I also talk about how Benatar was Benatar was given like a version of the niche replacement argument um, by a philosopher called Brian Tomasic. Brian Tomasic is a philosopher who has done a bit of work in the field of wild animal suffering and stuff like that. So Benatar was given this like a version of the niche replacement argument by Tomasic, and I don't know why, but David Benatar interpreted that as like a positive claim, which I've already said in the previous section that it's a mistake to interpret the niche replacement argument as like a positive claim. It's an internal critique. Um, we're not taking any burden. All we are saying is that it's underdetermined. Um, so yeah, like you can read as a response. Like it's not even clear to me that he's interacting with the niche replacement argument in any like interacting with in the sense that he's falsifying a premise or whatever. Um, so yeah, like
So the niche replacement argument was this one, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one that Avi came up with. But I think Brian Tomasic might have given Benatar a different, like some variation of it. Maybe not like a space intergalactic sentience patrol kind of argument, but something different, like something that talks about like wild animal suffering or something like that. Something that's
Uh,
restricted to suffering on this planet.
and do you have any ideas why they called it the niche replace? What does niche mean?
Oh, so niche refers to like um, so for example, like in the context of ecology, like a given area of land is called a niche for like a given animal. So for example, um, you know, should I say the African savannas? Like what animals are found in the African savannas? Like lions,
Yeah,
giraffes. Yeah. So
tigers.
yeah, so those so the African savanna is a niche for these animals, in which they have like they occupy a role in the habitat. Um, so it's called niche replacement because you're taking over these ecological niches. So you're replacing the ecological niches that are occupied by these animals with human settlements or human constructions or whatever. So that's why it's called the niche replacement argument.
Makes sense. So yeah, we're drawing towards a close here. So
Yeah.
we're on point number 4: logical entailments of negative utilitarianism.
Yeah. So this is a bit more of a this is more of like a this is less of an attack on anti-natalism, more of an attack on negative utilitarianism for people who consider themselves negative utilitarians. I'm just like showing them like an example of what stuff one would be committed to if they are a negative utilitarian. So, for example, if someone drugged a woman and they, sexually assaulted a woman, um, the guy did not, sorry, the woman did not experience any suffering. So the action is at 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 least it's neutral um, or negative utilitarianism. So I think that's just like a crazy entailment.
Yeah, I
Um,
think we gave a few examples earlier on in the stream
yes.
about just things
Yeah.
people with negative utilitarians, the stuff they'd have to bite the bullet on.
Yeah. So this is sort of like a critique of negative utilitarianism itself. It's again an internal critique. You're taking those values and you're showing that these other crazy things are entailed by these values. So you are trying to motivate people against having these values. So yeah, I guess that's pretty much it with respect to. I mean, as I said before, I could have just ended the article at number one, but the Benatarian asymmetry, the niche replacement thing, these are like really interesting topics, so which is why I kind of decided to cover them in the article.
I think it's interesting that you also tried to get into the minds of negative utilitarians and try to see if it's entailed on just the act of wanting to reduce all suffering, and it doesn't seem to be the case. And yeah, you're open to seeing some data
Yep.
if anyone has it. So you're
Yeah. I've I haven't I've been in quite a few anti-natalist debates, and I just yeah, I haven't been even close to being persuaded of that. Um, but yeah, what do I say in the concluding remarks? Let me.
so you said
Oh
I think there's
yeah,
some.
it's just some yeah. So it's like, so some people would say, oh, like even if you like if you're a vegan and you have children, is there's no guarantee that your children will be vegan, and they might just like start being carnivores or whatever. But yeah, like I just say that just like a priori, just based on whatever we know about adherence to like family values. Um, it's very rare for someone to stray away from the values that have been bestowed onto them by their family. Vegans are actually like an exception to the rule. We are one of the few peoples who like we are like a minority that has deviated from the values that families gave us. Um, Most people don't like if someone was taught that it's okay to kill and eat animals, that's what they're gonna believe from like the beginning of their life to the end of their life. And we can even talk about like examples of religion. People if children lived in a household with religious parents, uh, they were like what was the evidence? So I even like link a paper from like a study conducted by Pew Research, um, that children who lived with two parents in a religious household were more likely to participate in religious activities. So you can think about it in like a household where both the parents are like vegan. They are more likely to participate in vegan activities. Uh, and the children which have lower participation in those activities in the childhood are more likely to dissociate from the religion. So if a child had less um, participation in like vegan activities and stuff like that, then we can make like, again, this is sort of like I mean like it's sort of an induction. It doesn't have to map exactly. Maybe there are like extenuating factors where um, the company that kids keep in school would sort of make them stop being vegan later on or whatever. I think those factors come into play. But we can sort of induce by looking at examples like religion and the values that have been given to kids from their childhood. And we can just look at that deviant, sort of like deviant behavior that is different from the values that they have been given to by their families. It's pretty rare. Um, so oh, I actually don't have like a reason to think that my children would stop being vegan or whatever, provided that I do a good job of instilling vegan values in them.
Yeah, I agree. It's yeah, if they're if they learn good, principles. Like my intuition is that people won't go towards supporting, you know, the rights violations of animals if they're just taught from it from childhood. So
Yeah, and we also have like I think we have had vegans around for long enough to have like first generation or second generation vegans. Like so, vegans who were born vegan. So I think we have like enough examples of people who were born vegan and they stayed vegan. Um, I'm not sure if there's a study done on them such that it tells that like gives us a proportion of how many stick to it and how many quit. But just like anecdotally, then all the vegan kids that I've seen, they have remained vegan. All the people that I know had vegan kids and they raised them vegan. I haven't seen any of them quit veganism. So that, I mean, it's anecdotal, but yeah, whatever.
Yeah, no. Yeah, during the vegan camp out, I saw a lady. Her daughter was giving, a speech about, but she was still quite young, the daughter, but she was giving a speech about, ethical lifestyle. So I would,
Yeah.
I would agree with the concluding remarks, and we don't have too many questions, but yeah, brother Marcus says, yeah, I'm not sure if they were watching throughout the whole stream or not, but yeah, we sort of, the article was a rejection of, it considered different approaches. You can answer this question.
Yeah. So so the whole thing is that the article lists different reasons why I'm not an antinatalist, and the main reason, the first primary reason, is that it doesn't seem to follow from my it doesn't seem to follow from threshold deontology, or whatever variation that best captures my values. um so yeah, like, I'm not persuaded that it follows from threshold deontology. People are open, like, they are welcome to make the case. They are welcome to make the case that there is more suffering than not. um where could we find, let me finish the first one. So yeah, so the first reason that I mentioned was that it doesn't follow from threshold deontology, and the rest were just like discussions about the other stuff, like, niche replacement and entailments of negative utilitarianism itself, and Benatarian asymmetry. As to how, where we can find the response of Benatar, I actually don't know where this is from, but I think you should be able to find it somewhere. So I got this off of the Ask Yourself Discord, where someone posted a screenshot of this. But it's like, so DB is referring to David Benatar, like that's David Benatar's reply, and that it's the screenshot of that. Um, Maybe if you do like a keyword search of whatever David Benatar has written, you might find a place where it is. Like the actual source. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess we can wrap up here. Thank you everyone for joining, and
Yep.
actually also in the article there was some extra things, such as you explained why you don't think it's a rights violation as well. That was another reason for the rejection. And
Yeah.
so if anyone has any questions, they can reach out to you, right, through
Absolutely.
Instagram or
Yeah.
through
The
Discord.
fastest way to reach me is Discord these days. So just like, you can go to one of the Discord servers, and my, like, it's even linked in the article. At the end of the article, um, you can join the Vegan India Discord, or the Modal Jungle Discord, or the Ask Yourself Discord, and just ping me at Abuta. Um, and yeah, that's the fastest way to reach me, because I'm pretty active on Discord these days. um, Instagram is probably the second fastest way to reach me. um, and yeah, I think that's the only two ways to reach me, at least for someone who doesn't personally know me. But yeah.
Mhm. And whoever found the article interesting, definitely share it, because I feel more people should read this article, because it's not too well known, I think. And it's there was someone else the other day. I mentioned I was doing this live stream, and they were like, "Oh, I'm just starting to write an article on anti-natalism," so I shared your article with them. So let's wrap it up
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
Thanks
absolutely.
everyone
So
for
this
joining.
this article has been pretty, like, I've had a couple of people who wanted to challenge some of the stuff in the article, but like, it just ended up not amounting to anything much. So yeah, like, I'm happy to see some, like, actual, like, really good challenges.
Yeah, I've watched a few anti-natalist streams, and I don't think they've challenged you, but most of the time they just say natalist. They're trying to come up with reasons to justify it.
Yeah.
So I think I heard someone say, "Oh, it's like carnists when they come up with excuses to justify uh, their actions." But if someone wanted to challenge you, they'll need to. How would be the best approach to challenge you? To attack your sort of your framework or
Yeah. So, well, I can think of someone just saying that, oh, there's some problem with threshold deontology, and they can probably show me some case where threshold deontology does not capture my views, and in favor of a different normative theory, and that normative theory leads to antinatalism. That's one way to convince me. The other way to convince me is to just assume threshold deontology and show me the empirics to suggest that there's this excess suffering that's being
caused. Yeah.
generated. Yeah, those are the kinds of approach I like. I can That's the way, if someone wants to challenge, that's the way I would envision it being done. Yeah, there might be some other ways that I'm not aware of, but yeah.
And did you see the Nutrivore? He had an argument for like displacing the nature, the world. He had it like
Yeah,
premise by premise. So
yeah.
maybe we
Yeah,
can look at
he
this at a
has like
later
a couple
point.
of arguments. He even formalized the intergalactic space travel sentience destruction patrol squad argument. So yeah, he has a bunch of like really nice arguments.
Cool. So yeah, let's wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yep, I'll see you. Yeah.